Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me for our latest session of looking at the founding fathers of Judaism. And today, in some ways, is the climax of everything we've been talking about so far, because we've been studying the stories of all these individual rabbis, of Rabbi Akiva, Rabban Gamliel, of these other personalities who were together trying to work to create a new beginning for Judaism after the destruction of the temples, post-apocalyptical reality. Temples are destroyed, the Jewish people are exiled. What do we do with Judaism? We can't offer sacrifices anymore. God has left us, is no longer in the building. There is no building. What do we do? And this is the period that we're examining. And we've been looking at it also through the lens of what does it mean as conservative Jews? Because conservative Jews also, we tend to look at the period that we're in, post-Shoah, post-State of Israel, all the changes in our society as also being a moment of truth, just like that was a moment of truth. And the rabbis needed a tremendous amount of courage to do what they did. And so the story that we're going to be reading today, we're going to get to, we're studying the story of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, as we read last time, was a rabbi who started out, he was the son of a wealthy man, but he never studied Torah. He was deeply immersed, it seems like, in the general Greek culture in Israel. And when he was 22, 23, he told his father, I want to study Torah. And his father said, what? You're going to start studying Torah now? Go have some children. They can study some Torah if that's really what you want. But he really wanted it. And he left his father's house, went up to Jerusalem, and his thirst for studying Torah was so great that he didn't eat anything and he had bad breath. And they eventually noticed and said, why, what's going on? And they realized he wasn't eating anything because he was so on fire and so too humble to ask. And eventually, the moment that we finished in last time in that beautiful story, it sounded a little bit like a musical, right? Starting from rags to riches kind of story. His father comes up to Jerusalem to disown him because his son amounted to nothing. But his son, in a few years since he's been away, has impressed all the great rabbis of the time. And suddenly his father is seated among the great notables of Jerusalem. And the greatest rabbi, the head of Sanhedrin, no less, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, asks his son to start speaking Torah. And at first, he can't make the words come out, but then he starts to speak. And what he says is so profound that the people there are hooked. They couldn't tell if it was day or night. And there's like a light was shining from his face. And suddenly his father stood up and said, I leave him everything I have. And his life changed. And then we started to read one or two other stories about how many disciples he had and his knowledge, which was so vast, as he became one of the top rabbis of his time, Rabbi Eliezer. And today we're going to get to the story that's probably the most studied in the whole Talmud in our days. Maybe including the story that we read a few times ago, Rabban Gamliel. This is the pivotal moment in Rabbinic Judaism. This is one of those days. I mean, they call it that day in the Talmud, but this was a story that has such powerful symbolism, such rich symbolism. And we've been studying it in the context. Now we know all the characters because we've been studying about them and learning about them. And we'll see what it means for who we are today, who they were, and maybe also thinking about the future of where we can take our people and religion. So we are going to begin. If you have, does everybody have a copy of the materials? They were in the email. You have to click on them to see them. And we're going to start reading on page 222. And Alan, would you mind beginning for us number 91? We're going to read we're going to go quickly through a few short stories about Rabbi Eliezer that kind of indicate some of his journey from that beginning story. And then we're going to go into deeply that powerful story. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so on page 222, number 91. To accommodate his many disciples, Rabbi Eliezer's house of study was almost as large as an arena. and in it there was a stone that was reserved for him to sit on. Once Rabbi Joshua came in and began kissing the stone and saying, "This stone is like Mount Sinai, and he who sits on it is like the Ark of the Covenant."
So what does this say about the greatness of Rabbi Eliezer? He's Moses, right? He's being compared to Moses.
Yeah.
92, our masters taught. It happened.
Actually, we're going to skip to 94.
Okay, 94.
Actually, go ahead. No, go 92. Let's do 92. Go ahead.
They all begin our masters taught. So
that's true. You can do 92. Go 92. Why not? Okay. Go ahead.
Our masters taught. It happened that Rabbi Eliezer passed the Sabbath in Upper Galilee, and they asked him for 30 decisions in the laws of Sukkot. Of 12 of these, he said, I heard them from my teachers. Of 18, he said, I have not heard. According to Rabbi Yosei, son of Rabbi Judah, Eliezer said the reverse. Of 18, he said, I have heard them. Of 12, he said, I have not heard them. When he was asked, Master, is all you say nothing other than what you have heard? He replied, You finally forced me to say something I have not heard from my teachers. I may tell you that during all my life, no man arrived earlier than myself at the house of study. I never slept or dozed there. I never quit the house of study, leaving another person inside it. Nor did I ever engage in chit-chat, nor have I ever in my life said a thing I did not hear from my teacher.
What do you make of this? What does this tell you about him?
Well, he was very serious because nothing extraneous. Oh, sorry, Charles, go ahead.
Charles, go ahead. So,
okay,
very serious, right? And I'll just say that, the house of study becomes a paradigm in all of these stories for, they would spend all day there studying and praying and studying, and all the other people there are no slouches, right? And Rabbi Joshua kisses the stone where he was delivering sermons is no slouch either. And you spend that much time in there. I can tell you, as someone who spent a decent amount of time in the house of study, there are a lot of people who end up sleeping in the house of study at different moments. I remember once.
He sounds like the perfect scholar.
Well, yes. He seems to have a huge reverence for the past.
Beautiful.
And
yeah.
the notion that he only speaks of things that he's heard before from his teachers is a little troublesome. Except it sort of typifies him as a guy who's really into his past and really not too much of a free thinker, I would think.
Mm-hmm. I think well put. And we saw that in the short blurb from Pirkei Avot that we read last time, number 89. He is like a plastered cistern which does not lose a drop, like a flask coated with pitch, which retains its wine, right? He just retains all of the past. He's like the guy who memorizes the Talmud, right? There's these stories of people in the ultra-Orthodox world where they put a pin in the Talmud, and you open it and you tell them a few words around the pin, and they can read off the whole rest of the page. It's and so it's people who have that level of soaking up the tradition. But like you said, the fact that he's seems so reticent to quote other people's. It seems like he's very comfortable within the received tradition. He's not a great innovator at this moment.
Or maybe he's just being humble and saying that he said a thing that I did not hear from. I didn't say anything that I didn't hear from a teacher before me.
Yeah, that's his theme, been a theme since the beginning, right? His humility. He is a pious and humble person and very respectful of the others, of others. But he definitely seems to have this fire for study. We've seen this from the beginning, from the other story. This fire for just absorbing more and more of Judaism, and he's obviously incredibly gifted. Anybody else before we continue? We do 94.
You know, he does come across as, yes, dedicated to his study. In a sense, he's caring because, you know, he'll keep at it as long as there's one other person there, and he'll keep them company and be their chavruta. But
Nice.
on the other hand, never engages in chit chat. You know, he doesn't get to know anybody, and he doesn't let anybody get to know him. And he has no knowledge of what's going on with anybody. Does anybody need help? At least that's what I'm generating from that phrase. You know, he doesn't care about anybody. Well, it's not that he doesn't care, but he doesn't want to know enough about anybody else to say, oh, there's somebody who needs help, or gee, you know, mazel tov, you had a baby, or it's your birthday, let's have birthday cake, or whatever. You know, he's just so serious and you know, so centered on study.
To the point he's losing him.
Blots everything else out.
But then he's losing his humanity. If part of our religion is to interact with our fellows, and if we're applying the shall we say the laws, or then you're isolated. There's something missing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because there is this whole stream in our tradition of what's called bitul Torah, of things that take you away from studying Torah. You know, if you're walking and you're talking to somebody about Torah or thinking about Torah, and suddenly your attention gets wavered by something in the tree, and you go investigate, that's bitul Torah. And in a study hall, in a traditional study hall, Beit Midrash, you know, if there are some people who are a little annoying, and they'll come up to you, and if they hear you're talking about nonsense, they'll say bitul Torah. You know, you're talking about something that's nullifying the Torah. Literally, like you should be spending your time just studying Torah, and so it's a value that I agree takes away from the humanity, and he's that guy, right? He's that guy who's going around saying, you know, you focus on Torah, no chit chat, no bitul Torah. So let's continue on, and let's go to number 94.
Okay, 94. Our masters taught. It happened that Rabbi Eliezer was once sitting and lecturing the whole day of a festival on the laws of that festival. When the first group left the lecture hall, he said, "These are people who have casks." When the second group left, he said, "These are people who have amphorae." When the third group left, he said, "These are people who have pitchers." When the fourth group left, he said, "These are people who have flasks." And when the fifth group left, he said, "These are people who have only goblets." When the sixth group began to go out, he said, "These are the people who will receive a curse."
Okay, before you go on, I want you to read the notes, number 12 down to 15.
12. Okay, so the first group are the very rich, counting their wine by casks. They have left thus early because of the large quantities of food and drink waiting for them. These are gluttons. 13. These are less rich than the second, but wealthier than the next group. 14. Less keen on their pleasures.
Next is a curse. Yeah, go ahead.
and the emptiness of the lecture hall roused his ire.
Those are the ones who receive a curse. Okay, go ahead. Then he fixed his eyes.
Then he fixed his eyes on his disciples, and their faces began to change color. At this, he said to them, "My children, not of you did I speak thus, but of those who gone out, putting aside life eternal and occupying themselves with the life temporal." At the end of the lecture, when the disciples who had remained behind were about to take their leave, he said to them, "Go your way, eat the fat and drink the sweet, and send portions unto him for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto the Lord, neither be ye grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength."
Okay. So, right, he's a bit of a scary teacher. He's the one who's throwing chalk at the people in the back who are not paying attention. But yeah, he has a very powerful idea of what's right and what should be done. I think we see that. Very Gavordic. Okay, so I think we're gonna begin our story. Let's go to number 98. Would someone like to read for us?
Sure.
Okay.
98.
Yes.
Okay. We have been taught, say a man made an oven out of separate coils of clay, placing one upon another, then put sand between each of the coils. Such an oven, Rabbi Eliezer declared, is not susceptible to defilement, while the sages declared it is susceptible. The oven discussed was the oven of Akhnai, snake, so called because it precipitated arguments as numerous as the coils of a snake.
So let's stop there. Can you go down and read number 10, the note, just so we're not. When I studied this in rabbinical school in depth, we went deeply into what the point of halakha is. We don't have to go that deeply. It's not that important for this story, but it's important to have something of a sense of it. Okay, go. Just read number 10, if you don't mind. Note at the bottom.
Since each portion in itself is not a utensil, and the sand between the portions prevents the ovens being regarded as a single utensil, therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the oven is not liable to uncleanness. The sages, however, hold that the oven's outer coating of mortar or cement unifies the coils so that the oven is liable to uncleanness.
Okay, so we have a point of halakha, right? A point of law, and something that's this isn't a great philosophical issue. This is just a matter of one of the thousands and thousands of points of law that the Talmud and the sages discussed. A certain kind of oven that was made in those days. And about, do you have to, is the oven susceptible to being impure or not? And if it was susceptible to being impure, if it became impure, then you couldn't use it again. So go ahead.
Where it says it is taught?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It is taught on that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward every imaginable argument, but the sages did not accept any of them. Finally, he said to them, if the halakha agrees with me, let this carob tree prove it. Sure enough, the carob tree was uprooted and replanted 100 cubits away from its place. No proof can be brought from a carob tree, they retorted.
Let's stop for a second. How do you imagine the scene playing out?
Sort of like they're sitting around and arguing, and he presents his case and making obviously a sort of like a miraculous appeal. The miraculous appeal happens, and it's probably amazing to onlookers, maybe even some of the people participating in the debate, and they're kind of just like the other people around, and whoever is saying this last statement, no proof can be brought from the carob tree, they're just kind of casually sort of retorting with it. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer feels very dismissed.
Yes.
maybe even quite frustrated at this point, since the miraculous thing he said, it happened, and they're just like, oh, yeah, you can't use that.
You can't use that, right? He's like, I've got proof from God, right? And you can't. He said, we don't want it, and and it's everybody against him, first of all, right? But he is sure that he is right, and he's known as the one who has all the past halacha, right? He's the expert. There's no, but he's Moses, right? They kissed the place, but they don't want to accept any of them, right? And it's him against all these sages, and it's him. And you weren't there, Gabriel, for the other one. These aren't just nameless sages. These are the great sages of the time, right? This is Rabbi Akiva on the other side, and this is Rabbi Joshua, and this is I don't know if Hanina ben Dosa, but these are the great rabbis are all discussing this one matter in the study hall, and he's becoming more and more heated. Rabbi Eliezer, I know, the we don't know how everybody looks, what their appearance was, but we know Rabbi Akiva, he started with nothing, but he became a man. He became wealthy, and so he was quite a presence because a humble person. We know Rabbi Joshua from later was kind of a short, kind of bald, and not very beautiful. But it's all these different characters, and Rabbi Eliezer is here arguing with all of them. Okay, let's. Charles, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
No, I'm fine. Thank you. I was just reading through this carefully.
Okay. Okay, Gabriel, go ahead. Continue, please.
Okay. Again, he said to them, if the halacha agrees with me, let the channel of water prove it. I think that probably refers to a river. Sure enough, the channel of water flowed backward. No proof can be brought from a channel of water, they rejoined. Continue.
Sure. One more.
And again, he urged, if the halacha agrees with me, let the walls of the house of study prove it. Sure enough, the walls tilted as if to fall, but Rabbi Joshua rebuked the walls, saying, when disciples of the wise are engaged in a halachic dispute, what right have you to interfere? Hence, in deference to Rabbi Joshua, they did not fall. And in deference to Rabbi Eliezer, they did not resume their upright position. They are still standing aslant.
What do you make of this?
I think it's really powerful. So there's another miraculous occurrence that's happening. He's saying, let the very building that we're in, the very space, basically like confirm my reasoning, and even that happens, and there's still it's still dismissed, or at least appears to still be dismissed, but it's in a very interesting way. It's a rebuke to the buildings itself, as if the building should know that it has no place in this conversation. Almost.
It's got to be completely logical. Anything transcendent cannot be used as an argument when talking about something that isn't in an enclosed logical space. That's I think what the point of this is, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gabriel. You wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just going to agree with that. Yeah, I mean that seems to kind of be the message here, but I also just like sort of like it's like a retort that's even directed against the very walls of the building itself, as if nature already knows I have no role in this conversation per se. This is it's like not a voice in the discussion, almost as if to exclude that sort of aspect of reality. I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if each instance would have been a little different if Rabbi Eliezer, like it with the carob tree, if he would have said specifically, let the carob tree uproot itself and move. He kind of said something very general, and then the rabbis could have said, he didn't say that was what was going to happen. He didn't say something specifically. He didn't say, let the water run backwards. It could have been just the water ran backwards, but that may not have been what he was intending. So I'm just kind of, maybe it's nitpicking, and maybe it's a good argument. David can tell me philosophically it's a good argument, but it just seems like if he would have said something very specific, it's a little harder to argue against if it happened.
But they're arguing within a box, okay? They're arguing within a closed box, a closed system. So you can't, they're claiming, I mean, this guy has magical power, so he can point to anything outside the system and have it move, have it shake, etc. But what they're looking for is some coherent argument within the system that will show them logically and coherently what they're trying to get to, and none of those things are in the system of their thought.
So would you consider?
But there is. Go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I would consider the system halakha, or the laws you have that you set up.
So this is the great issue that's being debated, because there is that sense of, okay, we have this closed system that's being debated between the sages based on logic. On the other hand, what is halakha? Halakha is God's path, right? Halakha is a path that God decided based on the Torah, based on the interpretation of the Torah, based on what Moses revealed at Sinai. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying, I'm telling you what the halakha is in this matter, and look, God is on my side. God is making this carob tree fall, this making the water go back. How can you say I'm wrong when God is clearly on my side? And this is all about God, right? Halakha is about God. It's about doing God's will. If not, there's no purpose to it. What's the purpose? Who cares if what the oven is, if you don't think it's all because, you know, in the Torah, there's laws of what's pure and impure and laws of kashrut, and then you kind of deduce them back into all these different cases. And so they're, as we've been saying from the beginning, they're trying to deduce God's law. That's the whole purpose of it. And that's what Rabbi Eliezer is saying. You think I'm wrong? I'm working with God's law. And they're saying, it doesn't matter. We don't care. We don't care that we're God. We don't care that you have this ability, that you're inspired. He said, look, I'm inspired. He's basically saying God is speaking through me, but they're not hearing it. And go ahead, Phil.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't want to interrupt you before.
I was just going to say that the image of the study hall, which is the center of the rabbinic endeavor, the walls are caving in. That's a pretty powerful image, right? The walls are about to fall in this moment, in the tension of these two sides.
Yes, I wanted to agree, and I don't quarrel with any of that, but I wanted to agree and disagree with David, if I may. There is this box, and they want to keep the discourse within the box, but at the same time, and it's clear that there is no, and this story, as I understand it, it is not abridged in this little part anyhow from the Talmud. I mean, it's not like they discuss in that sugya, or in that section the different arguments. He makes an argument. He says he advances 100 arguments or a dozen arguments. He makes many arguments, and they're not mentioned here. And nobody cares about his arguments. They're really not arguing with him about the arguments. They're like lawyers who just cover their ears. Nah. This is the way it is. We've already decided this question, it seems to me. And there's I gather that the structure of the argument is such that you could make arguments on both sides, because it's the characteristic kind of ambiguous issue which is common in lots of legal systems, that you can't decide it definitively by just analyzing it, because you'll come up with 6 arguments and 12 arguments and so on. And so when Rabbi Eliezer appeals, as David said, as you were pointing, to a higher authority from the unexplainable, from the miraculous, They're not interested, but that gets us back to the question, which, of course, comes up of the authority, which is a different question from determining whether something is true. It seems to me within any system. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for bringing that. And the context is actually interesting because the sugya, the general this topic in the Talmud where this is discussed is rarely studied, but it's actually about ona'at dvarim. It's actually about hurting someone with words, or it's about it. So it's just that famous saying in the Talmud that the killing, that whitening somebody's face in public, shaming somebody in public as if you killed them, is just one page before this. And so there's a whole, and it's also about, even if you go into a store and you tell somebody, I want to buy this, and you don't really, and you kind of waste that person's time, that's also part of that sugya. And so there's a whole sugya that's about shaming people and hurting people's feelings and hurting people with words. So that's the interesting context. But you're right, the Tanuch shel Akhnai, the oven of Akhnai in itself is not important,
there's another piece to this, of course, and that is that a guy named Gödel showed in the beginning part of the 20th century that there are no closed systems. There are no systems that are absolutely closed, that are completely consistent in themselves. There's always something that seems to come from the outside, something transcendent within the system itself. So this is very interesting. And the fact that it's an oven and it's shaped like a box sort of intrigues me, like a cube. So you have both pieces here. You have the guys that are staying within the closed system, trying to solve the thing within the closed system. And you have the rabbi who sees outside the system, who sees the perhaps intent of the thing. He sees the intent. He sees the initiation of the whole structure from another perspective. And you have both of these things.
Well, it is, and there's also greater debate that we're going to continue to read about that's been going on, right, since that story of Rosh Hashanah and Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Gamliel, of who has the authority and how do you work out God's will in the world, right? Halakha is working out God's will in the world. And so it's a system, but first of all, it's a religious system. It's a new system, or newish. And what came before this? Before this was a system. What was the argument between the Pharisees and the Sadducees? The Sadducees were, you've got the Torah, that's all there is. You have the Torah, and you can't budge from the Torah. That's what the Sadducees said. Then we have the offerings in the temple, and it's literal. We have a literal transition. We don't change. We do have God, and we have prophets, or we have this prophetic tradition telling us what's from God, and that's how you decide things. It's not, that was the way. That was the way that Judaism had existed pretty much until this moment. We know from how to do things from what came before. And we don't deviate. What does Deuteronomy say? We don't deviate right or left, and we don't add anything. Lo tosif, you don't add anything. The book of Deuteronomy said we don't over more than once. So let's continue reading. Gabriel, let's do one more paragraph from you.
So let's see where. Oh, I left. Okay. Again, Rabbi Eliezer said to the sages, "If the halacha agrees with me, let it be proved from heaven." Sure enough, a divine voice cried out, "Why do you dispute Rabbi Eliezer, with whom the halakha always agrees?" But Rabbi Joshua stood up and protested, the Torah is not in heaven, Deuteronomy 30:12. We pay no attention to a divine voice, because long ago at Mount Sinai, you wrote in the Torah, after the majority must we incline, Exodus 23:2.
Read the next little bit too, please.
Oh, okay. Rabbi Nathan met the prophet Elijah and asked him, "What did the Holy One do in that moment?" Elijah said, "He laughed with joy, saying, 'My sons have defeated me, my sons have defeated me.'"
Keep on going.
Oh, okay. It is said, On that day, all objects that had been placed within the oven, objects Rabbi Eliezer had declared clean, were pronounced unclean. Presently, they were brought and burned in fire. After Rabbi Eliezer's departure, the sages took a vote, excommunicated Rabbi Eliezer, and asked who will go and tell him. I will go, Rabbi Akiva volunteered, lest an unsuitable person go and tell him and thus destroy the whole world. What did Rabbi Akiva do? He donned black garments and wrapped himself in black and sat at a distance of 4 cubits from him. Akiva, said Rabbi Eliezer to him, why the different garb today? Master, Rabbi Akiva replied, it seems to me that
We lost him. Someone else take over?
Seems to me that your companions are parting from you. At that, Rabbi Eliezer rent his garments, removed his shoes, slipped off his seat, and sat on the ground, tears streaming from his eyes. The world was then smitten. 1/3 of the olive crop, 1/3 of the wheat crop, and 1/3 of the barley crop were ruined. Some say that even the dough in women's hands fermented and was spoiled. The sages taught great was the wrath that befell the world that day, for anything Rabbi Eliezer cast his eyes on was incinerated.
Let's read one more paragraph and then we'll stop.
Indeed, on that day, Rabban Gamaliel was traveling on shipboard when a huge wave arose, threatening to drown him. It appears to me, he reflected, that it is on account of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Then he stood up and called out, Master of the universe, it is known and revealed to you that I have not acted for my honor.
I think my internet. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're back. Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Glad you're back. That I have not acted for my honor, nor for the honor of my father's house, but for your honor, that dissension might not multiply in Israel. And at that, the sea's rage subsided.
Okay, let's stop and we'll read the postscript at the end there a little bit more. So this is a big day, right? This is a big day, and right, Hayomahu. This is it's the same day that Rabban Gamliel was deposed in some kind of mythical sense, right? This is the day when Rabbinic Judaism was worked out and created, and what's going on? What is the symbolism of all of this? And then what do you make, knowing Rabbi Joshua's place in the other stories, that it's Rabbi Joshua who's the one who fights back against Rabbi Eliezer, right? But Rabbi Joshua is the one who, in the story of Rabban Gamliel, right? He's the one who's humble, who just sits there while he's being, and then he goes to his house and he's a poor, right? He's got black soot all over his walls because he's a blacksmith, and he's the compromise guy. That's Rabbi Joshua. What's God's place within all of this? I mean, God, right? God first says, okay, why are you arguing with him? He's right. Rabbi Eliezer is right. Stop arguing with him. But then Rabbi Joshua says, hey, you said to us, the Torah is in our hands. We go after the majority. And they find out, well, what is God saying? God is laughing and saying, you beat me, you beat me. Such an interesting moment, right? I mean, part of it is very bold. Part of it is very bold because it's saying, it's taking God out of the picture on some level, right? And it's saying, we've got to work out what God wants between us. And we're not going to look to symbols. We're not going to look to signs. We're not going to look to all these things. You know, it's very courageous. We're going to work it out between ourselves and try and find out what's best for the Jewish people and try and find out what's best for us. Now, right in the story, God is laughing. God is like, okay, you defeated me, you beat me. God isn't angry at them. God isn't saying you didn't listen to me. God is God is okay with how this goes. And God is very, right? The God of the Torah is fire and brimstone, loud, powerful voice. The God of the Talmud is a much softer, God. It doesn't seem to have that almighty kind of voice. I'm going to come down and make everything shake, right? God is, the rabbis gain a lot of power in this story, and God loses a lot of power in this story. I think that part of my sentiment.
God is no longer imminent, right? He's been kicked out. He left the temple. His presence is no longer felt by the regular folk. So the only connection there is to the divine is the transcendent connection through the rabbis. So they can feel it, but the average folk can't anymore because his presence or his immanence is gone. So God is, I don't know, he's maybe happy with that, or feels that it's sort of a humorous thing. He's leaving the earth and all of creation up to the people, up to the beings who have been created, and he's sort of watching.
Someone wrote an interesting story to think about it. Someone had a very good imagination, and comparing everything and justifying what's happening and describing it in all these different forms. Whether it's the walls or the oven, are the 10 coils? What do they refer to? Are we talking about the whole system and the word dissension there, and things are tumbling or they cave in until people come to some sort of an understanding and compromise so you can move forward and modify things? So I'm getting all that sense in my vocabulary. I'm not an adept at discussing these things, abstract things vocally, but I can see all of those interplaying, and then how much of this has been, there's an interesting author or authors that developed all of this.
No, I love that, Charles. It's kind of like the moment we're in now in the world, right? This kind of battle between the democratic forces and autocratic forces. And so this was a moment in their world where there was the forces of tradition, the forces of Rabbi Eliezer, of, we don't quote anything that our teachers haven't mentioned. The power of the past, the power of divine, even the power of prophetic powers, right? Spiritual powers, and that was the past. And then there was this other voice, and this is the voice of the new rabbis, as we've been reading about, who are trying to work out through compromise, right? Rabbi Gamliel, through their own authority, trying to figure out what's best for the future, and they're trying to work that out. We have to figure out what it's about, and there's this big battle between the two, and there's tremendous spiritual power on the other side, right? There's a lot of spiritual power the way they're describing it, and right, it takes Rabbi Joshua, who the thing I get from Rabbi Joshua through all these stories, and we'll go even more deeply later into him. He just seems like a really decent, good, humble man. It's almost like the force of his decency and goodness counteracts the wild spiritual power of Rabbi Eliezer, right? And he's like, and he's a man of reason, and so it's where is Judaism going to go? And in this moment, Judaism takes a very, very powerful step towards a tradition where it's worked out by the majority, a tradition where we don't look at signs, we rely on logic, we rely on the majority, we rely on rabbis talking to each other, we rely on all these things, and we don't look outside of that. I mean, it's a very powerful moment, right? It could have gone other ways, and this is the way Judaism went for a very long time. And it doesn't even matter what came before. It's like we've got to work it out. We've got to work out what's best right now. And I mean, even in Judaism, one could say in some ways, conservative Judaism loves this story, because conservative Jews also feel we're trying to deal with what's best now. We're not just slaves to the past. And it used to be the Orthodox Judaism loved this story too. They don't love it as much anymore, I think, because I think they've lost their way in this way, right? They're more like the Rabbi Eliezer. They don't want to be flexible, and so there's this drastic step of excommunicating Rabbi Eliezer, right? Drastic. They're pushing him out, despite his genius, despite him being like Moses, right? It was Rabbi Joshua who kissed the very stone where he stood, and they're throwing him out but they know it's dangerous stuff, so they send Rabbi Akiva to try and, give the bad news. And even then, it's still, the power of Rabbi Eliezer is such, right? All this destruction that's rained upon everyone.
Would you agree that they go out of their way to humiliate him before they excommunicate him, and by saying all these decisions that they made that he rejected and tried to give them reasons, they actually burned all the unclean vessels and so on, because you couldn't cleanse them under their argument or under their conclusion, and then they take every step they can to humiliate him, and then we have Rabbi Akiva still being the master of tact, and it's interesting what you said about the different phases of Orthodox tradition in regard to the story, which is just the beginning of the thing. It's so fascinating. But it might be worth mentioning that Christian scholars, I think it's fair to say, I can't generalize maybe, but certainly some Protestant scholars take this text as just a vindication of their view that the vital Hebraic faith that they see in the early books has been replaced by complete rabbinism rather than a Judaism. And they're just appalled by it. You can read these writers. There's very little sense of humor in their writing about it. I think it's very problematic, as you point out.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. Well, it's funny, as I mentioned earlier, the context is hurting somebody's feelings, because Rabbi Eliezer's feelings clearly are hurt here, and he's, for all of his contributions, he was doing what he felt was right. And yet, as we've been reading through the last 2 months, it happened again and again that the rabbis had to be forceful in the way they were doing their work to create the future, right? Rabbi Gamliel is forceful for Rabbi Joshua several times, right? And making him come on Yom Kippur with money in his hand. And there's a sense, I'm not sure if it's purposeful shaming, but it's a sense of, when you're a good manager, you can't, right? Somebody was telling me this recently, they're in their field, they're a manager, and he said, you can't get too close to all your employees, because you have to, when you have to be the manager, you have to be able to be the manager, right? So these rabbis are being friends, and they're having to do what's best for Judaism, and sometimes they're taking very drastic decisions for what they feel is best. Maybe there is an element of shaming here as well, but they don't want any vestige of Rabbi Eliezer's position. I mean, they're very forcibly taking this direction, and I do. I have some the Christian scholars on this, but there is in my mind something this is a very courageous way of looking at religion, I believe, because we're not looking at signs, we're not looking at symbols, we're not trying to deduce it from this or that. We're just coming together and trying to figure out what's best and using all of our heads together. And there's something beautiful and courageous about it, but there is also something that's lost, right? And what's lost is a sense of relying, a sense of God's imminent presence, which is lost. There's a sense of what's most important are, those leaders who also have a God connection, that they have an important voice, right? Rabbi Eliezer is shut down and turned away. And Rabbi Akiva, okay, we'll take Rabbi Akiva. He's someone who has a foot in both worlds. He has a foot in the Pardes, in the higher world, and the foot down here, and we'll take him. But someone like Rabbi Eliezer, he's too dangerous. And there's a sense from this story and so many rabbinic stories of the danger of spirituality and spiritual power, right? You look at the story of Shimon Bar Yochai in the cave, you look at the story of, even Rabbi Akiva, who went up into the Pardes that we studied. You look at this story, and right, the mysticism and spiritual power is dangerous, right? Is uncontrollable, and so there is something of that. On the other hand, the rabbis created a culture that survived 2,000 years of exile, and this is what was needed, and it was very different than what else was in the world religiously, right? And a lot of the beauty of the rabbinic tradition comes from its humanity, and we're going to take into account people's human needs, right? Rabbi Eliezer, who doesn't say hi to people in the Beit Midrash, that's not our model. Rabbi Eliezer, who's the spiritual powerhouse, he's powerful, and we brought him up because we acknowledged him. But when he started to turn against the majority, well, not sure we want him in our midst. And I think we see that in the Judaism that we live, all those forces at play and all that consciousness at play. It's a story that in some ways articulates so much of what the rabbis were creating in these first centuries, and even going up until maybe the end of the Talmud, where by the end of the Talmud, it's already much more integrated. The system has been closed. But here they're still creating the system, and there's tremendous pressure, I think, symbolized by all of this destruction against it. Let's read the last bit, and then we can have some more. Phil, do you mind reading the last paragraph there, Ima Shalom?
Not at all. Ima Shalom. Ima Shalom was Rabbi Eliezer's wife and Rabban Gamaliel's sister. From the time of this incident on, she did not permit Rabbi Eliezer to prostrate himself upon his face in prayer. One time, a poor man came and stood at the door, so she took out some bread for him. On her return, she found Rabbi Eliezer prostrated on his face. "Get up," she cried out to him. "You have just slain my brother." Even as she was speaking, a horn blast coming from the house of Rabban Gamaliel announced that he had died. Rabbi Eliezer asked, "How did you know that my prayer would bring about his death?" She replied, "I have a tradition from my grandfather's house. All gates may be locked, except the gates for wounded feelings." Wow.
A really rich and hard to fully understand. But there's something here about the power of the spiritual power of, the danger of that. There's a sense of God, listening to those people. This idea of wounded feelings of Rabbi Eliezer. I mean, it's amazing that Rabban Gamliel, who's the force of all of this in some ways, trying to take this, even though he's absent in the beginning of the story, he's the one who we followed, is the one who's trying to put more and more power in this rabbinicism, if you want to put it in that sense. But he's killed amidst all of this. I don't know. What are people's thoughts before we conclude?
I can't help but feel that there's like a lot of parallels between the way that Rabbi Eliezer is described and some of the supposed founders of the Essenes, almost, in the sense that you have this very strong conviction of how the halakha is supposed to be, how you're supposed to derive jurisprudence, but also this appeal to the mystical to get like halakha, to get law in the first place. Like, from what I understand, but what I've read about the Essenes, that was a big thing about them. The Qumran community, they had some sort of prophetic figure, a teacher of righteousness. I don't think that we know exactly what his name was, and he did similar things like this. So I don't know. I think there's some sort of similarity in the appeal to prophecy, and whether or not that is relevant in the context of developing halacha in the now, in individual situations versus using more, I guess, principled approaches.
It's interesting because I think it's a really interesting point, and there was of all the ferment of this period coming from the Essenes, coming from the other kind of quasi-messianic figures that were all walking around, the authors of all the apocalyptical books, and the life of O'Brien, right? There was a lot of appeal to, and you can't take away the early Christian kind of ferment that was going on around all of this. And then so this text, what's amazing about it doesn't just say, we don't listen to this voice, but it's saying even though this voice is actually speaking to God and has spiritual power behind it, we're still not going to listen to it. But it's saying that God is saying, laughing and saying, "You have beaten me." God is saying, I'm glad with what you're doing, because God maybe is happy that the human people are taking into their own hands at this moment in this way to create the next step.
And by the way, this sort of thing happened not only in the Jewish religion, not only with the Essenes, but also with the ancient cities where they used to pray to a fireplace. And they in the presence of these people was the God. The God was in the presence. The God was very concrete. And then something happened, and the God sort of disappeared from the presence, just as what happened to the Jewish people when God disappears from the presence of the temples and leaving the people on their own, essentially, but with some people who can pull into the overview and get a look at something divine from time to time.
As you were talking, it reminds me, when I was traveling in India, and I walked up a big hill. I didn't realize there was a road on the other side, but I trekked with some people that I was with up to the very top, and we got to it was a day Obama got elected, because I ended up in some village in the middle of the mountains with barely any running water, but someone had a satellite dish, and the results of the election came about. But they continued traveling all the way up, and at the top of this big hill, got there like at 5 p.m., was some kind of little temple. And at the top of the temple, there was a priest, and he said, come, I'd like to, come in. And so he said, okay. So because there was a place where we could stay. So we came with him, and and there was in front of him, he was in the middle. There was a big floor. In the middle of the floor was a hole. And he started worshiping the hole in the floor. And it felt like that hole had like a pillar going down to the center of the world. That's kind of what it felt like. And he had this really primal way of bringing up spirit and of worshiping this thing. Was so powerful and evocative. And that's kind of like what's lost. We're living in a very intellectualized spirituality and this. And thank you for bringing that up. That made me. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about this? Maybe we'll
I can just, if I can just juxtapose something. So, as we've read this, it also, to the opposite side of that is to rely on the miraculous more than, and what I think of is in the Christian tradition, there are certain congregations, there are certain churches who practice the gifts of the Spirit, so to speak. Right. And I can tell you from personal experience, having interacted in those environments, that people in those situations almost, in fact, I wouldn't say almost, they do put far more emphasis on the instantaneous miraculous without necessarily firm bearing on the Bible. It's almost like that takes secondary, the word that God has given takes secondary place to what the instantaneous, what's happening in this moment. And that's the extreme, of course, but I preferred this path over that path.
The grounding, the other is dangerous.
Yeah,
is that the charismatic?
To do both.
Correct. The charismatic,
Why relegate yourself to a single thing when if the others open to you, to give that a try too.
But so I do have to go. We can continue talking about next time. Let's simmer. And next time we'll read about the death of Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll continue talking about it. And I feel both the beauty and courage of this system, and I also feel a certain amount of sadness that this voice was so powerfully pushed aside, and you know, the ramifications of it, and you know, something something had the power to destroy, but also stop being the center of the religion, and seeking God became de-emphasized, and became more about, you know, study, and, you know, let's come to things of sanity, people. And you know, having people like that is like, maybe there's some fear about, you know, the zealotry that caused the temples to be destroyed, and, you know, all those, they were really much going for a much more kind of even field, and no, let's not go with all these crazy miracles and these powerful, you know, people who don't know what they're going. We don't know where we'll end up with them. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.